Now that the Roman Republic has expanded outwards and conquered many of its enemies around the shoreline of the Mediterranean Sea, they have now taken on a whole new empire of people. Even though the Republican form of government is still functioning at home, we are transitioning here into an era where the political system is going to be falling apart, especially in reaction to both internal and external developments. One of the key elements that's happening in Rome, and this was alluded to and we talked about this before, is that there's a hyper-concentration of land inside of Rome, especially closer to the city itself. Large groups of people are putting together what are called latifundia, which is essentially a fancy word for large agricultural plantations. Most of those plantations producing food and other things for the marketplace using slavery. In that process, there is the squeezing out, so to speak, of all the small soldiers that used to serve in the army. So one thing that's becoming a problem and is one of the things that's on the brain of many of the thinkers in the Republic is the idea of how to get back to that citizen soldier, whether it's to put soldiers on the frontier and provide them with property, or to think about how they could have some sort of land reform issue. And one of the key politicians who's going to raise this interest, this idea, is Tiberius Gracchus. And Tiberius is going to be a tribune. He's going to be the elected sort of leader of the plebeian class under the new way in which the Roman government operates. And his simple idea is land reform. And what he means by that is that he truly believes that Rome is being undermined by having the military forces that used to be from the small farms are now sort of divorced from that. They are simply soldiers, and if they're not soldiers, they can't be anything else. So the temptation will be to either have them have some kind of agricultural property to go back to, in which case some of these large-scale plantations of the elite will have to be broken up, or to settle the soldiers someplace on a frontier where the Roman territory had conquered some area and sees an opportunity to put soldiers and their families out there and to have them be essentially Romanizing a district and at the same time providing them with the needs of having land accessible. Tiberius Gracchus is one of the politicians who pushes for this. He immediately runs into great resistance from the elite Roman senatorial class. And eventually, he and his brother in the next generation, they will both be essentially forced to death and threatened. So that the idea of the elite Romans raising the issue, knowing that they're undermining the greater, grander good of the empire by simply creating professional soldiers who have no link to the old system, the old landholding system, essentially is creating soldiers now who are going to simply follow their officers. Simply going to be divorced from where they were before, and they're going to be moving on and following what is necessary. With that idea in mind, about 50 years later, you'll see this in your book, Marius, around the year 100 or so BCE, who is going to be working through his military career and increasingly growing powerful, will essentially get to the point and make a decision. He essentially is now looking at an army where most of his soldiers are increasingly landless. They do not have opportunities to sort of be grounded in their agricultural production like a good Cincinnatus legend would have it. And increasingly the soldiers are looking to be professionals for 20 years or more, or for life. So that there's no sense that there's going to be this, be the small farmer, go through your military career and go back to your home area and serve in state offices. It essentially now is that the Romans are getting into an era where the soldiers are simply going to want to expect a career. And not only a career, but an opportunity for them to, of course, make a living, not just survive day to day, but have loot or territory over time. Also, what's going to happen in this trend is now that the soldiers are sort of divorced from their old neighborhood, broken out from where they were coming from, now their loyalty is essentially to that person who puts butter on their bread or food on their plate, and that is their military leader. And Marius is going to be one of the people who is going to be very seriously looking at this and finding a way to create not only his own power, but that of his family through military means. It won't necessarily be through dedicated service to the Senate or dedicated service to the offices of state, This is the new sort of ethos. The new sort of Roman man is the military man. And it's not a temporary situation. That would have been several hundred years before. Now it's a permanent situation. The change in Rome is remarkable in the sense that the society that we knew, say, 500 or 600 years before this, which was devoted to the idea of the all-powerful paterfamilias, the idea of a man should do his duty to his state, the legends of, say, Horatius and Cincinnatus, they still exist, but now they are so far divorced and so different from what the Romans are doing that it's remarkable that this place is holding together yet. With now Marius's ideas moving forward, we're going to open the door for the creation of the military dictator, the military man. If we have this down, Roman political system is changing. The real power now is the man who can lead a successful army, a client army, one that thinks of him as almost their boss. Not the abstract idea that, I'm serving in the Roman army and I have an abstract oath to, say, a Roman constitution, that was never written, doesn't exist, or I'm going to just follow the dictates of the Senate. That kind of idea is missing here. I mean, many of us in modern America, if we do go into some of the armed services or into the service of the government, we know we all take an oath when we do that. And this is an oath to a larger abstract idea, to the Constitution, to the rule of law. Romans don't have that. Increasingly what's happening is people like that you read about in your book, like Julius Caesar here, is a military man who establishes himself in power by essentially having enough military power and money to buy his way through what he wishes to do. The new model Roman politician is not going to be sitting in Rome talking in the Senate, is not going to be serving through all the offices of state back in the old Roman headquarters and homeland of Italy. It's going to be a military man who is controlling an army, and the soldiers in it recognize that their fate, their fortune, and their fame are all linked to the general who leads them forward. Caesar then is one of many of these Roman generals who will use their military power to intimidate the state, and in his case, actually take over. You'll see that his general career here leads him up to the point where he is, like many of the other Roman men of his time, a military man. He spends a lot of time working as a military soldier in very successful campaigns in what you know as modern-day Spain, and also what the Romans called Gaul, which we call modern-day France, essentially. He was there for many years, conducting a series of campaigns against the Celtic peoples who live there, and they're very long and drawn out. They're very, very bloody and expensive, but he is, over time, able to add more and more territory to this growing Roman state that is moving it away from its focus on the old Roman homeland on the Mediterranean Sea, and increasingly projecting power into Northern Europe, into colder climates, into groups of people who are very removed from traditional Roman understandings. But nonetheless, the territory they control is lucrative, does turn a profit. As the Roman situation in the political situation in this time period is very confusing. I'm sure the textbook that you're looking at will go through a series of different political moves and machinations, and you'll see lots of different combinations of politicians. Take a look at the people involved there. I want to focus on Julius Caesar here for a second as sort of our sort of poster child character, the one we're going to focus on to understand a larger idea. And what he has done now is he's built a military career. He has a very large army that's loyal to him. He recognizes he's in political and other conflicts with other large Roman important officials who have their own armies and their own political careers. And eventually what he's going to do is he's going to take his army and he's going to start marching towards Rome. Now, on one level, if you look at this from the outside, this could be treason. A soldier is using an army against his own administration, his own sort of government, his own traditional people. On the other hand, this is also a way for Caesar to kind of show himself as sort of the savior, that he's going to be the solution to the problem, that he's bringing himself and his army into the old Roman heartland, not as some sort of invader, not to destroy, but to come back and sort of secure the blessings of good Roman government. And he will pose as sort of the temporary dictator. This was a post that existed in Roman society. It was intended as somebody who is going to come in from the outside during a time of crisis and fix an issue and then give up office. Cincinnatus, for example, was one of those dictators, a man who came, did his duty, and went back home. Caesar sees himself in the same kind of situation where he's going to now come into Rome as the dictator and do what he can to fix it. But nonetheless, he's coming at the head of an army. So he comes to Rome with his army. Many of his enemies flee, and he has then the title of dictator for life presented to him after he intimidated many of his enemies in the city of Rome. This is in many ways a watershed moment, at this sort of a time frame where we're looking for the transition from the old Rome to a new Rome, and it's going to have different rules and different ideas. On one hand, there's still people out there who are talking about the glories of the duties of Cincinnatus or Horatius or of Lucretia, right? The duty-bound Roman of tradition who had known their place and had executed their job. Now we have essentially a military dictator. He is not the same kind of traditional Roman that people would think of. He's related to many of them. By marriage, he was related to Marius, who had done the army reform. It also shows us here that as he goes into Rome, the senatorial power is relatively weak. They have a lot of prestige, a lot of historical continuity of the Senate, but essentially now the Senate is revealed to be relatively hollow. It's a series of people who are factional and fighting each other, and the real power is not in the politicians of the Senate. The real power is, of course, now in the military. The man with the army gets to make the plan. Caesar does come in and does try to get himself involved again in the deeper powers and assessments of what's going on. He's getting deeply involved in making long-term governmental policy and talking about decisions that he's going to make. But in the process, he also is creating a significant amount of enemies. Many people see him not as the solution to the Roman problem, but as the problem. That somehow the old Roman balanced political republic and the rise of the Senate could be brought back if we just got rid of the dictator. That the death of one man could then sort of like reboot history, and we could go back and recreate the greatness of Rome that made us what we are. In that context, Caesar is very vulnerable. He has many enemies around him in Rome. He has tried to be generous to many of them. He's provided many of them with opportunities for jobs. He has forgiven them some of their sort of trespasses against him. He has been trying to at least make some efforts to get the situation, the political and military situation in Rome back on a stable footing. And in the process of doing that is increasingly looking to the Senate as some of the people who could assist him in executing his larger term plans to make Rome stable again. Now, the painting we're showing here is a very stylized version, but essentially the story is this. By the middle of the month of March of 44 BCE, Julius Caesar is told by several people who are soothsayers and predictors. Remember, both Greek and Roman religion have this idea of oracles and divinations, that you can see the future. And a soothsayer supposedly had said to Julius Caesar that, watch out for the Ides of March, the middle of March. At the Senate meeting, a conspiracy that had been put together for quite some time surrounds Caesar and stabs him multiple times. Multiple senators stab Caesar multiple times. And on one level, it's quite a shocking moment. Why would this conspiracy of very elite men get together and then in public execute, essentially, Julius Caesar? Not try to compromise with him, not to constrain him by the law or any other means, but simply to execute him in public, one dagger stab at a time. Lots of ways to interpret that, but one way to do that is to think in terms of, remember, if the senatorial class, as a group of people who are very elite, want to recreate the old Roman government that they benefited from and ran, what they should do then is take responsibility for what the plan is. And if Caesar is the problem, they need to have a lot of people involved in solving that problem. Many of those senators were very proud to do what they had to do that day, and they took it with the idea that this was going to solve the problem of political and military instability. We'll see what happens next, but in essence, the death of Caesar is just going to set off the next chain of events and the next series of problems in Roman government. Be sure to read very carefully this section about the Roman Republic and the death of Julius Caesar, and of course, take a look at any sample questions that can assist you in understanding this area.